Are you ready to freak out? Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. We are quickly approaching the midpoint of 2024, which feels like it's just flown by so quickly, but it is a nice opportunity to take a beat and reflect on how the reading year so far has gone. I'm going to do the mid-year freakout tag, and I know I tend not to do too many tags on this channel, but I do enjoy this one. I did it last year, it was lots of fun to answer the questions, and I always love watching other creators answer these questions. I can't off the top of my head remember who started this tag, but I will find out and link to them in the description. There are 15 questions in total, but before I jump into those, just some general reflections on my reading year so far, because it doesn't really ask about like how many books you're reading and what the general vibe is. So far this year, I've read 51 books. I just finished my 51st one today, which was Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And you know, that's more than I've ever read at this point in the year so far. I normally set my reading target just to be 52 books per year, one per week. I'm obviously way outstripping that pace, and I don't know necessarily that it's a good thing. I think sometimes I find myself trying to read too much or read too fast, and I should put in a little more effort to really think about what I'm reading, luxuriate in the prose, reflect on books' themes and what they're trying to say before quickly moving on to the next book. So that's something that I'm definitely going to think about going into the second half of the year. Whether I'll be successful at that or not is a completely separate matter, because it's not the first time I've had that reflection on my channel, and it almost certainly will not be the last time. I'd love to know if anyone else out there is feeling the same. Do you feel like pressured to read really quickly? Do you get too much FOMO about new and exciting books and just end up ploughing through them? It might just be me, but I suspect it's not. Despite feeling that I'm going a little bit too fast at times, I am having a really fantastic reading year, and I've given so many books 5 stars just because I've really enjoyed what I've been reading. There are even a few books that I gave 5 stars, and then I had a little bit of change of heart when I compared them to the other books that I gave 5 stars and downgraded them a little bit. But yeah, overall, I've just been reading tons and tons of absolutely fantastic fiction, except for one, which was my first 1-star read in about 2 years, but don't worry, that's coming up soon. But yeah, anyway, let's get on with the questions. And question 1 is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And despite having read so many fantastic books, it didn't take me long to think about this, because there's just one standout. It's not going to surprise you. It's James by Percival Everett. I think this is going to be on a lot of people's best books of the year, probably at number 1 for a lot of people. It's just a really stunning achievement. If you have been living under a rock and you don't know about this book, it is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, or rather like a reframing from the perspective of the slave Jim. It's a book that is full of heart and humour and adventure. It's gripping, it's funny, it's so clever in what it does and how it plays with the reader's expectations, but also plays with the source material to give things a new meaning. I cannot fault this book. I think it's Percival Everett's opus. Question 2 is, what's the best sequel you've read so far this year? And I guess this is a little bit targeted at people who read a lot more like fantasy, romantasy, sci-fi, all of that sort of stuff, because I haven't read any sequels this year, so I haven't got an actual answer to this, but I'm going to cheat a little bit and go for another book that's a reframing or retelling, and that is 1984. No, it's not. It's Julia by Sandra Newman, which is a retelling of 1984 from the perspective of Julia. So it's doing a kind of similar thing to James. It's a very different book though. And what it does really successfully, I think, is take this world that George Orwell created, which was Oceania, essentially a dystopian version of our own world, and shine a light on what the consequences might be specifically for women and specifically for Julia, who's a little bit of a bare bones character in the original 1984. It's incredibly readable, surprisingly horny, and I had a really good time with it. Another good reason to talk about this book is because I've got an embarrassing story related to it. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to Hay Festival, and one of the events I went to was Sandra Newman in conversation with Anna Funder, who wrote Wifedom, the Women's Prize nominated non-fiction book about George Orwell's first wife, Eileen. And they were discussing Orwell as a man and their relationship to his work, and how their work was very much informed by and in conversation with both his autobiography and the work that he produced. The great thing about Hay is that after every event, the authors go over to the bookshop and you can line up and get the chance to say hello to the authors and get them to sign your book. So I took my copy of Julia with me and got it signed. It says, "To Ben, thank you for liking my book," which I did. But after lining up for like 20 minutes, I got to the front of the queue. I walked up very confidently and said, Hi Julia, I feel like that is an understandable, honest mistake, but I died inside a little bit. I wanted the ground to swallow me up. I wanted to go and join the back of the queue and just do it over, but it was fine. Question 3 is, what's a new release you haven't got to yet but want to? And I've got so many of those on my shelves. There are lots and lots of books that I'm very excited about, but the one I'm gonna pick is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. This is one that has sat on my bedside table for quite some months now. I got it close to when it came out, and I knew as soon as I got it that it was one I wanted to prioritize, so I put it on the bedside table, and then other books have just been put on top and on top and on top, and I still haven't read it. I think the kick up the bum that I needed to finally get to it is that this has just been nominated for the Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize, which is a fantastic shortlist, but Glorious Exploits is one of the 6 books, and I just need to get on with it. One thing I have noticed though is that it's had a bit of a cover change in the process in the UK, and I don't love what they've done to the cover. They've changed the font to be a bit more boring. If they were going to change it, they probably should have just switched to the US cover, which has the Greek statue with the googly eyes. It's lots of fun. I think that would definitely make it stand out more on the shelves. But I quite like this cover. Oh yeah, and I should say what this book is about. It's set in Sicily in the aftermath of a failed invasion attempt by Athens. And I think there are loads of Athenian prisoners on the island of Sicily, and some of the Sicilians decide to put on a play using all of the prisoners. I don't know much more than that, other than that it's quite humorous. Ferdia Lennon himself reads the audio, and that's had some rave reviews. So I am also tempted to do a bit of a listen-read combination with this one, but we'll see. Question 4 is, what is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year? And I can't give any other answer than Playground by Richard Powers. This one comes out in September. I think it was September, then it moved to October, now it's back to September. But yeah, Richard Powers releasing a new novel is like a massive literary event for me, and I'm very, very excited to read this one. I think this is about setting up a community that lives on a platform in the sea. Yeah, it's about 2 people from very different backgrounds coming together because they are chosen for humanity's next adventure, a plan to send floating autonomous cities out into the open sea. So this feels like Richard Powers doing what he did for Forests and Trees with the Overstory, but for the ocean and the sea, and I'm very excited for that because his research is second to none. I'm sure he's probably a sea expert now, and his prose is just always so beautiful. So very, very excited for this one. I don't know how I've managed to resist reading this already, because I was very lucky to win an advance copy on Instagram, and the proofs are absolutely stunning. Dare I say, better than the final cover. I think I'm probably saving it for a little bit closer to release, when there's a little bit more hype, more people can go and read it soon after I review it, and who knows, maybe a Booker nomination beckons. Question 5 is, what is my biggest disappointment of the year? And if you have been watching my wrap-ups, it may be not surprising at all that Leave the World Behind is my biggest disappointment. I knew readers were divided on this. I was hoping that I'd be in the category of loving it, but I gave it a go in January, and my God, I just hated it so much. I gave this book 1 star, and I almost never give a book 1 star. I always try and look for the good in it and who might like it, but I just found this absolute drivel. It said so much and used so many unnecessary, complicated, crappy words in crappy sentences, and it amounted to the square root of bugger all. Excellent concept, embarrassingly bad execution, in my opinion. And it's really dented my interest in Rumen Alarm's second novel, which is coming later this year. I will definitely be waiting to see what reviewers think of that one before I let myself have even the inkling of temptation. But going by this, I don't think I will. Question 6 is, what is your biggest surprise of the year? And my answer is kind of a double Dolly situation. So I have spoken about being a Dolly denier before around Dolly Alderton. I really thought I would not get on with her work at all, but I listened to the audio of Good Material earlier this year, and it was absolutely terrific. What a brilliant narrative voice, brilliantly delivered by the narrator on the audiobook. And I just found it a story that was very funny. It's actually really hard for books to be funny, but I found this one really quite amusing. And it had a lot of heart and a lot of realism. I found the relationship and all its complicated messiness really believable. So yeah, that was a huge surprise for me. And then the second Dolly was The Restless Dolly Maunder by Kate Grenville. People seemed to really dislike this one when it was nominated for the Women's Prize earlier this year. And there were a lot of people disgruntled when it was shortlisted. This is another one that I listened to on audio. And although the quality of the audio recording was garbage, I thought the narrator did a great job. I found Dolly a really persuasively real and complex character despite all of her flaws. So yeah, the surprise of the year for me so far is 1 Ben, 2 Dollies, 9 stars. Question 7 is, what is your favourite new author? And this can be either a seasoned author that's new to you or a new debut author from this year. My pick for this one is an author that I just haven't read before that's got quite a huge backlist, and that's Anne Patchett. I read Tom Lake earlier this year, and again, it was another one where I'd seen some mixed reaction to it, people saying that it was a bit boring and poorly paced, but I read it going in with maybe middling expectations, and I absolutely loved it. It was such a tender, heartfelt story about family and missed opportunity and our own personal histories, and it used the COVID lockdown in what I thought was such an effective way without being sort of front and centre of the novel. Yeah, I just adored Anne Patchett's writing, and I'm really excited to get to more of her backlist. I have since picked up a copy of Bel Canto, which won the Women's Prize, and it's not really a reading project for me to read all of the winners of the Women's Prize, but I would like to get through them at some point over the course of my reading life. Yeah, a stunning, stunning book that I've gone on about quite a lot on the channel, so I won't bore you with any more. But if you haven't read it, you should. It's so good. Question 8 is probably the weirdest question on this list and the one that I find hardest to answer, and that is, who is your newest fictional crush? I don't really have fictional crushes, and to be honest, when I reflect on it, a lot of the men in the books that I read are either terrible people or really quite pathetic. So let's just say the sea is not very full of fish. If I was forced to pick, I was thinking maybe like Cyrus Shams from Martyr. He is a very messed up guy. He's got a lot going on, but you kind of read it and you feel a lot of sympathy for him. You want to save him. You want to help him. A bit like his friend slash lover slash whatever Z is in the book. And now that I'm talking about that, Z is probably a better person to have a crush on because he's a little bit more together. Would I call it a crush? Probably not. Maybe a better option though is Hecate from Henry Hoke's Open Throat. What a cool character. It's a queer mountain lion who has these really interesting reflections on human silliness. And I loved this book, and I would hang out with Hecate in a heartbeat as long as they promised not to eat me. I don't know though, am I the only one who struggles to think about who a fictional crush would be? Surely unless you're a romance reader, you don't spend your days swooning over the characters that you're reading. But I could be wrong, you tell me. The next question is, what is your newest favourite character? And this one was a lot easier to answer. My favourite character that I've read this year has got to be Mattie Ross from Charles Portis's True Grit. I've been loving westerns lately, and I loved this book, and I think the shining jewel at its centre is Mattie Ross, and her voice is just astounding. She is a really interesting, motivated, precocious girl, hell-bent on revenge. And this book is just so much fun and such a joy to read. Even though its themes are at times pretty dark and there's a lot of danger and peril that Mattie's in, she is just so resourceful and brilliant, and I loved reading her. What's interesting for me is how much I found that this voice had in common with Demon Copperhead. And last year when I did the mid-year freakout tag, my answer to this question was Demon Copperhead, because I thought his voice was also fantastic. And I guess what I'm learning about myself is that I find precocious, witty children really entertaining to read. So if anyone has any more recommendations for novels with fantastic, clever kids at their heart, do let me know. And don't say The Goldfinch, because Theo Decker has nothing on Demon and Mattie, and I'm willing to fight about that. Question 10 is, what is a book that's made you cry? Or if you haven't cried, what is the saddest book you've read this year? I had to think about this one quite a bit. I think Leave the World Behind was a contender because I wanted to cry about how freaking bad it is. But I think the closest I've come to genuinely being upset and moved by a book is probably Home Fire by Camila Shamsi. There are some devastating things that happen in this book, and in particular the section from Anika's perspective I just found absolutely absolutely heartbreaking. I read that with my stomach in my throat and tears in my eyes, and it was, yeah, a really, really powerful read. I absolutely loved this book. The next question is kind of the flip side of that, which is, what is a book that's made you happy? And I think for me, it's another book that's sad, but as I mentioned when I reviewed it, in the way that Still Life is still a feel-good book without being soppy. It's one that's got a lot of emotional sadness at its core, but it's still a book that makes you feel happy and it makes you smile and you just love the characters. For me, that book this year was The Offing by Benjamin Myers. It's about a young boy called Robert Appleyard who ends up living with an older woman called Dulcie, and it's just an unlikely friendship that is about two characters helping each other grow, and I absolutely loved it. It made me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I don't know if that's a quote that Benjamin Myers would necessarily want on the back of his book, but that's how I felt. Question 12 is, what's your favourite book to film adaptation that you've seen this year? And I think Dune 2 has got to be up there. I thought that film was fantastic. It didn't quite hit the heights of Dune Part 1 for me. I didn't like it quite as much, but it was such an achievement of filmmaking. I think Denis Villeneuve is an absolute genius. What pips it for me is probably The Zone of Interest, though. That's based on a Martin Amis novel, and it's set just outside the perimeter wall of Auschwitz. And it follows the family of the guy who's basically responsible for the operations of the horrors of Auschwitz. And my God, what an affecting, harrowing film. I've never experienced anything like it in terms of like how it uses sound and what you hear in the background constantly. And there's a part where it juxtaposes what happened back then with the way that Auschwitz is now a museum that we can go and visit. Yeah, I just found it incredibly moving. One of the best films I've seen in a really long time. So I was ecstatic when it won the Oscar for Best International Picture. If you haven't seen it and you've got the appetite to be uncomfortable for a couple of hours, I would absolutely, hands down, recommend it to you. Question 13 is, what is your favourite video that you've made so far this year? I had to think quite a lot about this one, actually, because I wasn't sure. I often find the process of making videos quite difficult. It takes me a long time to think about what I want to say, to put my thoughts in order, to get that all recorded on camera and then put it together. And I'm often quite happy with the end result. But if you press me to think about which videos I like the most, I'm really not sure. I expect I'm going to really love the Japan vlog I've got coming up soon, because that's going to be a great memory of an amazing trip. But I obviously haven't made that video yet, so I can't pick that one. So I think what I am probably most proud of so far this year and most enjoying making are the monthly book news videos that I've been doing lately. It's been really fun, I guess, just for me to do the research on it and to put it all together and just to keep on top of what's been going on in the book world. But I've also loved the really positive response from all of you watching. I've really loved the engagement in the comments and people saying how much they've been enjoying the videos. And when other people really enjoy something, it's hard not to be swept along and enjoy it yourself. So those videos are probably my favourites of 2024 so far. Question 14 is, what's the most beautiful book you've bought or received so far this year? I think James is really up there. They've done an absolutely phenomenal job with that cover, and that proof of the new Richard Powers novel is also absolutely stunning. Really love both of those. But I did want to pick some books for this that I haven't already used for other questions. And so I think one of the most beautiful books that I have acquired this year is Amma by Saray de Silva. And this is an interesting one because when I first started seeing this online, I wasn't that blown away by it. I think this book just doesn't translate brilliantly when it's photographed or shown on online shops. But in person, it is absolutely stunning. All of the little leaves on this sort of double-trunked tree are spot glossed. And so when you've got it in your hand and you're moving it around, it has just this quite hypnotic effect. And I love the rainbow colours going on here. I think this is a really stunning book when you've got your hands on it. The other thing I wanted to mention was not a specific book, but actually a new publisher on the scene. And that's MTO Press, who are making just some absolutely beautiful objects. I think their house style is just stunning. It's nice and consistent, which you get from a lot of indie publishers, but I think it's still got a lot of character. There's quite a nice amount of space for these unique illustrations for each book. And then the books themselves are just really nice to hold. They're really beautifully made. Not to get too American Psycho about it, but the cardstock they're using for their covers is really nice, and the paper quality is great. It's a little bit thicker than in a lot of other books, and so you have this like beautiful weight to the books, which I think just makes for a nicer reading experience. So yeah, well done MTO Press. I'm loving your work. The final question is, what books do you need to read before the end of the year? And you know what? I don't need to read anything. I'll read what I want. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true. I do intend to read the entire Booker long list again this year. I had some doubts about whether I wanted to. Last year it was a little bit of a slog, and I thought, do I really want to put myself through that again? But the answer is yes, I do. I really enjoy the process of guessing what's going to be on the long list, the day that we find out, and then reading, reviewing, and ranking all of the books. I think that's just so much fun, even when some of the reading can be a little bit of a slog. So I will be doing that. I do have some other obligated reading because I'm doing a few reading challenges across 2024. And so I thought I'd mention a few books that I've got lined up for some of the prompts coming up. There's obviously my own reading challenge, the Good Read Challenge, which if you're not doing, come join us. You can still join in. It's not too late. There'll be a link to the video about all the prompts in the description, as well as the Storygraph. The book I'll mention is the one I'm thinking about for November's prompt, which is No Paragraph Vember, where really I'm trying to put myself out of my usual comfort zone and read a book that has a bit of a stream of consciousness vibe, that has very few paragraph breaks and not very much white space on the page. And the one I'm thinking of is Milkman by Anna Burns. This won the Booker in 2018, and so many people list this as like their favourite Booker winner ever. So I'm really, really intrigued to give this a go. I am a bit intimidated by it, but I shouldn't be, because Irish fiction is just so incredible, to the extent that I can't really think of many Irish books that I've read that I haven't loved. And I've just noticed this has a quote from Claire Kilroy on the front, who says, "It's excellent, original, funny, disarmingly oblique and unique, different." And if Claire Kilroy likes it, I like Claire Kilroy, so I think I'm going to like it too. I'm also doing the Savidge Prompts from Simon Savidge and Louise Savidge, and one of the prompts is to read a book with an honorific in the title of it, so like Mr. or Miss or Doctor. The one I really would like to get to is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. I adore Girl, Woman, Other, and I've picked up a few of Bernardine Evaristo's other books, and as tends to be the case, they've just sat on my shelves and I haven't read any of them. But this sounds great. It's being turned into a TV show. I would like to watch that TV show, and I would like to read the book before I watch that TV show. So this is one that feels perfect for that prompt. And if you're not familiar with this one, it's about a septuagenarian man who has been living a bit of a lie. He is married to a woman, but he's actually gay and been having an affair for 60 years with a man that he loves. And so I think this novel charts the fallout when, in his 70s, the cat's out of the bag, and what happens when his wife finds out. I'm very excited to read it. The other way in which I've got some reading obligations is something that still feels quite new and weird to me, but it's a really lovely privilege, and that's that I do get sent some advanced reading copies from publishers. And although there's no like contractual agreement that you have to read and review them, I feel an obligation to do so, because otherwise what's the point? It's very generous of the publishers to send these books, and so the least I can do is actually read them. I have got more than I would like to admit to get to, but two that I wanted to highlight were, firstly, Goodnight Tokyo by Atsushiro Yoshida. This was one that was sent to me by Europa. It comes out in July, and I took it on my trip to Japan with me, and I did make a start on it, but towards the end of the trip I kind of lost focus and wasn't reading so much. And so I only got part way through before I got home, and I put it down and set it aside for a little bit. What I read, I really liked. I do need to just come back to it and finish it before it comes out. But it's not very long, so it shouldn't take too long to crack through. The other book is probably the most recent addition to my shelves, and that is Mark Haddon's new short story collection, Dogs and Monsters. I have read quite a lot of Mark Haddon. I really enjoy his work. I actually think I've read pretty much everything except his most recent novel, The Porpoise. He's probably most well known for The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is a really enjoyable book, but the protagonist is so unique and has such a distinctive voice that I don't think it's very indicative of just how good Mark Haddon's prose is. I loved his first short story collection, which was called The Pier Falls, and in particular, the title story of that was just mind-blowingly good and harrowing, and it tells the story of some actual disaster that happened. It fictionalizes it. It was really, really difficult to read and sad, but brilliant. This is a new collection which seems to be a little bit more strange and fantastical, quite different from the first collection, which was grounded in realism. This seems spooky and unusual, and I am very intrigued by it. It comes out at the end of August. So that's probably the calmest freak out you might see this month. Hope you enjoyed it. I don't usually tag other people in these videos. I kind of take the approach that if you want to do the tag, don't wait to be tagged, just do it. But on this occasion, I am going to tag 3 other booktubers just because I'd be really interested to hear their answers. So firstly, I'm going to tag Lydia from Lydia Lost the Plot. She is very new to booktube, but she is an absolute natural. She is a bundle of energy, so much fun. Really love the way that she talks about books, and she's a bookseller, which has me seething with jealousy because it would be my dream to run a bookshop. So yeah, I would highly recommend going and checking her channel out. Then I'm going to tag Andy from Roro Reads. He tends to do one review at a time, and they're always really great and snappy and insightful, but I would love to hear his reflections on his reading year so far. And then finally, I will tag Jonathan from To Be Black and Loved. He has a great channel, but he's been on a bit of a hiatus recently. I think he's just posted his first video after like 8 months or so away. And so we haven't had too much insight on what he's been reading and loving lately. And I think this tag would be a really great way for us to hear all about it. But yeah, as I say, you don't need to be tagged in order to do this. If you'd like to answer these questions, please do so. I will list them all in the description below. As ever, if you liked this video, please do hit like because it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more from me, then hit subscribe. But until next time, toodles.